Hello. I'm really happy and thankful that you're here for a session about hope, because I think all of us around the world need hope, and today we're going to focus specifically on Israel and the US. And as all of you know, here in Israel we have been fighting threats to our democracy for over 2 years, for the last 2.5 years. And following October 7th and the war, we have been coping with so much pain and suffering. And yet, in the face of really unbelievable challenges, we saw that the Israeli public did not give up, but actually continued to protest at least once a week, calling for the return of the hostages, to end the war, protesting against the legal coup, for an investigation committee for the war, and to call for new elections. And following the last elections in the US, which were just a couple of months ago, and unbelievably, our friends in the US are facing similar threats to American democracy. I spent a few weeks on the east coast of the US just before Pesach, and many people whom I have spoken to were very eager to learn from us, Israelis, how to resist a dangerous government, how not to fall into paralyzing despair, and how to give people hope, which will drive them to the streets to oppose dangerous measures. What I told people in the States is that we have to hold a strong sense of the vision we are fighting for, and to understand we're not a small minority, but that in fact many people share our views and oppose the government. But friends, I have to tell you, it's not easy to find hope and to hold hope and to give others hope that we can bring about change. I actually felt a physical pain personally on the Ra'anana events, the pogrom in Ra'anana, on the eve of Memorial Day, and that made it also very difficult for me to hold hope in the face of so much hatred and so much violence. And this is why we asked to speak with Dr. Oded Adomi Leshem, a senior researcher in the Department of Psychology at the Hebrew University, and the director of, listen to this, the International Hub for Hope Research. And together with me, bringing the American perspective, is my dear friend Rabbi Josh Weinberg, who's the Vice President of the IRAC for Israel and Reform Zionism, and the Executive Director of IRAC. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Leshem, Rabbi Josh. And Dr. Leshem, let's start with you. And maybe
Oded is fine.
Oded, okay, we'll go with Oded. We need to lead Oded, we need to be encouraged. So let's begin by understanding from you a little bit about, explain to us, what is hope? And how does it actually work?
So that's an excellent question, and let me start by saying that scholars who investigate hope, there is no consensus about what hope is. Is it an emotion? Is it a cognitive construct? Is it a more behavioral concept? There is no consensus about that. So what I did is I kind of went back a few steps and investigated how lay people understand this concept, and also how it's defined in dictionaries. And I looked at dictionaries from many languages, and I found that there is actually a very straightforward kind of definition. What is hope? Hope is a desire accompanied by an expectation of fulfillment. Now, you don't need a PhD to come up with this definition, right? Hope is a desire accompanied by an expectation of fulfillment. However, if we look, we see that there are actually two distinct elements here. One is a desire. So in order for us to hope, we need to desire, aspire for something. This is what we call the wish dimension or the dream dimension, right? And the more we want something, the more we wish for it, the more we desire it, the more we hope for it, right? We don't hope for things that we are indifferent to. And then the second dimension is what we call the expectation dimension. And this is kind of how likely or what are the chances that this dream is going to transpire, right? This is the more cognitive dimension, like we're assessing the possibilities. Now, the trick is that these two elements are actually, there is a correlation. I'm actually a quantitative researcher, so most of my things are statistical models and experiment, etc. And we see that there is a correlation between which is an expectation, but this correlation is not very high. So it means that these things are quite independent. The amount we desire something and aspire for something is a different element than the amount we think or the levels we think that something is going to transpire. But hope concept is really confusing. So I'll give you an example. A good friend of mine said, I really, really hope that there will be peace, but I have no hope that there will be peace. So what did that actually mean? It means I really desire and aspire and dream for peace, but I think the likelihood is slim, right? So hope, sometimes we use it to signify our dreams, our wishes and desires, and sometimes to signify our expectations, level of assessment of possibility, all of that. Now, what I do in the International Hub for Hope Research and my students and other research projects, is we're trying to differentiate between these two elements and then have like two big questions. One, what predicts people's wishes and desires? So how could we make people, for example, increase their desires for democracy and equality and peace and these types of values? And the second question is, how could we increase their expectations, their belief in the possibility of these values? And these are two different questions. And the second question we're asking is, what element is more important? Is it more important to wish and desire and aspire for something, or to believe it is possible? What predicts people's engagement in collective action? What makes people go out on the street and protest? Is it their belief that their dreams could happen, or is it the level of their dreams and wishes? And I'll end by that, initial evidence points that the wish dimension is more strong. So it has more predictive power. And it says something about that. I think if we take this conclusion also to our daily lives, not as researchers, but as people that are concerned with the things that are happening around us and want to know what to do with them. Sometimes we put too much emphasis on what are the chances, right? People say, you are a researcher of hope, so is there hope? Meaning, is there a chance for democracy or equality? But we could also ask this question, like, how strong is the dream? Do we know to articulate it in a way that also captures people's imaginations and mobilizes people? So that's a long answer.
Let's deep dive into the question and how do we foster hope? People often say that it's very easy to hope when everything is lovely and the reality is amazing, but actually hope matters most in dark times, right? You see the stars when it's most dark outside. You said that hope is mentioned more times in the Bible, in the book of Job, than in any other book. It's so hard to hold hope when everything is so dark outside. How do you even begin to talk about hope and to hold hope when things feel so bleak here and elsewhere in the world?
Okay, so this is of course an excellent question, and there is no way magical solution for that. But first of all, we need to understand that hope is actually, it stems from hardship and crisis and suffering, right? When everything is fine and dandy, what is the influence of hope in our life? Quite marginal. But in tough times, in times of crisis, this is where hope becomes actually relevant and meaningful and significant. And many times I give this example of a small light of a candle. In a well-lit room, what is the influence of this tiny light? Marginal, insignificant. But as the room becomes darker, this is when this tiny flame becomes really relevant, significant. In fact, when the room is completely dark, this is when this small tiny flame is relevant, and the hope functions in many ways in a similar fashion for humans. So hope comes with suffering. Most of the philosophers, by the way, talked about the downsides of hope and that it always comes with some sort of pain. If we're skeptical, if we're pessimist, we're happy. There's no anxiety here. We already know that nothing is going to happen, and so we are kind of, relaxed. It is the hopeful people who are anxious. Okay, so we need to remember that. And perhaps to answer your question, if we, again, these are like two dimensions, right? So think about hope as something that has two legs. The first is the wish leg, the dream, the desire, the aspiration. The second is the expectation, right? What are the chances? And if we shift our attention a little bit to the wish dimension and know how to use our dreams to, mobilize people, then we are in a good start. And you know, it's important to say that most of the time, humans achieve their goals against the odds, right? So think about so many of humans' achievements, technological achievements or social achievements, these are against the odds, right? Zionism is against the odds. If the creators of this place 100 years ago will think, what are the chances of creating a Jewish state in the Middle East? Zero, right? So it won't happen. But it is most of the time, it is our people's dreams and aspirations that drive social change. And if they are strong enough, focused enough, and we use them in a sophisticated way, then maybe it's a start.
We'll talk soon about the ways to actually mobilize people, but Josh, I want to ask you, from the American perspective, what I felt during my visit to the US was that people were sort of in a state of shock, at least at the beginning, because everything happened so fast by the current administration, and there's a feeling of really threats from so many directions. So I want to ask you, before we ask Oded about like specific and concrete ways to actually mobilize people and to hold hope, what do you see as the American perspective now on the current situation and how to actually foster hope in this really challenging reality?
Well, first of all, before I answer, I just wanted to say it's just wonderful to be here with all of you. I see you as my family, as my friends, and so many of my teachers are here in this room. Paul, I'm looking at you. And so it's wonderful to be here. And second of all, it's a weird kind of situation for me because I spend most of my time in the United States and North America explaining Israel to Americans, okay? And now I'm here with Israelis talking about America. And so that's a little bit of a different shift. Rabbi Lindsay Danziger, who's here, representing the URJ and the IRAC, and she's the director of all of our campaigns, okay? And campaigns is essentially the answer to how we get there. And I really appreciated, Oded, what you had to say, because essentially we have to balance and find the room between two dichotomies: the world in which we live at the moment and the world in which we desire. Okay? And it's nice to have hope if we can find the thread. And here this works better in Hebrew, actually. Because how do we say hope in Hebrew? Tikva, of course, which comes from the word kav, right? Which is a line or a thread of hope. What's the through line there from A to B, or from Aleph to Bet to get to that place? And I think that when we're doing that, we have to acknowledge the opposite of hope, which is let's name and call out what are our fears and what are our anxieties. Okay, and we have to put them on the table and to say, okay, what do we fear actually happening, and then how do we push back against it? And the third piece is how do we balance between what I just learned this sort of structure about a week ago, the gap between our capacity and our aspirations. Okay, we can aspire and dream and hope and have expectations to the sky, okay? But the question then becomes, okay, so what can we actually do? Okay, what do we have the capacity to do? Where can we find successes and wins that can build? I read somewhere that mitzvah goreret mitzvah, one win or one success, one mitzvah leads to another. And how do we build that? So what's the reality? Yes, many of you got the email or read in a headline that Donald Trump became the President of the United States, okay, in November of 2024. He won the election in 2024, and in January he did that. Now, Trump 2.0 is different than Trump 1.0 because he's much more seasoned, experienced, a bit of an understanding about who he needs around him with an agenda that was rearing to go. Now, sometimes I see a direct influence between not only in the resistance movement and the protest movement that in America we should be learning more from Israel, but I also see influences. It's usually that America influences Israel, but here it's fascinating to see what happened over the past few months, really since January. I'll just give you an example. J.D. Vance, who is the Vice President of the United States, okay, put out I guess you call it an X now, a tweet, okay, in which he said, there are some people on the left in the liberal camp who see the Supreme Court as having a role in balancing the executive branch and sort of limiting what constitutes legal legislation, essentially. And I looked at that tweet and I said, this tweet was written by Simcha Rotman, okay, or by Yariv Levin. Okay, exactly right. Who's taking a page out of whose playbook? And exactly what's happening. Now, since January of 2025, just now since the inauguration, and up until yesterday, Donald Trump issued 152 executive orders, 39 memoranda, and 57 proclamations. Now, I'm not going to get into the Talmudic dakuyot of the difference between a memoranda and a proclamation versus an executive order, but let's just say that this is more executive orders and more single-handed action from one president or one branch of government than all of the presidents passed over the past 250 years. Okay? That is unbelievable, and he is absolutely pushing the limits of the United States' democracy to things that say, well, I guess it's possible, but it's never been tried before, and no one ever had the gall, I'll say, to attempt to do such things. Now, if you read a Yale professor, Timothy Snyder, who wrote it's a short, you can put it in your shirt pocket, called On Tyranny. It's a small book called On Tyranny, in which he outlines, basically, here's the path to whatever you want to call it, dictatorship or totalitarianism, and what you do first is centralize the power in the executive branch. Okay, check. That is being done. Okay, right in both countries. Remember, in the United States, the politicians do appoint the judges of the Supreme Court, and they do reflect a specific ideology. And that he did, an unprecedented record number of judges in his first term to throw off the balance of the Supreme Court. So first is centralized power. The next, attack the backbone of liberal institutions, which is higher education. Okay? Now, here's where we Jews have this weird sort of uncomfortable role. Is that, are we against anti-Semitism? I would like to think so. Okay? Of all the things I'm against, anti-Semitism is high up on that list. Okay? And how do we feel about weaponizing anti-Semitism when it comes at the hand of the shilton? How do you say shilton in English? I don't know. Of the ruling government, essentially, okay, who is ostensibly saying, okay, we need to rid college campuses of anti-Semitic action, and you can see what happened yesterday, and that the Trump administration found one institute, Columbia University, guilty of not protecting the civil rights of Jewish students. Okay, that is bad. That is terrible. But the erosion of federal funding, okay, and all under the guise of trying to combat anti-Semitism is just one example of how this is being eroded. Now, what do we do on that? Okay. Now, how many of you remember? Have you ever been to an amusement park or like? In America, they have this restaurant called Chuck E. Cheese, okay, where you jump in the balls. They have a game there where the mole comes up in different buckets, right, different holes, and you have to whack the mole. It is called whack-a-mole. That is the name of the game, okay? And whoever can whack, faster wins the game. That's how we feel a little bit right now, to say, do we speak out and do we issue a statement as if a statement from the reform movement is going to be the linchpin into what will prevent the government from moving forward? Okay, yes. But what we really have to do is reevaluate and reorganize and remobilize. Because we have an advantage, and that we have a base. We have 1.8 million Jews who are members of over 850 congregations. Okay, some large, some small, some more powerful, some less, some more wealthy than not. And this is a moment where we have to say, okay, both on a federal level, sort of a national level, looking at, okay, how are we going to both coalesce, not only within, like sort of the micro within our own movement, and the macro, how do we build coalitions and bring together partners from around the world who have shared values, let's say the pro-democracy camp or the pro-civil rights camp, for instance, okay? How do we mobilize that? And then how do we also work on the local level? So for instance, Lindsay is now working on building different local state campaigns, in local arenas, and it's not dissimilar from how we're looking at the frame here, where municipal elections are getting much more significance in the Israeli political arena, I would say. So all of those things are saying, okay, what is our capacity? What are we actually able to do with the resources that we have? The human power, money is really important. Okay, as you can see here, the huge amounts of money that were behind for years and years and years leading up to the judicial coup, judicial overhaul, judicial reform. Okay, backed by institutions like the Kohelet Forum and the Tikva, all of those. Okay, that is now behind also these massive pieces, massive forces that are looking to drive a specific agenda. Now, did everyone who voted for Donald Trump support the entire, what we call, sort of colloquially speaking, the MAGA agenda, the Make America Great agenda, Make America Great Again agenda, which could be, I hope to make America great. Okay, who can disagree with that? Yes, we all want greatness. Okay, but what we see is a calculated attempt to reverse some of the achievements that we, I think, in the liberal or progressive world have made, and that we see as the backbone. And I just want to lift up what Yonatan Shimriz said this morning about all those liberal values as Jewish values. Okay, now we can all decide that whatever we believe politically, and then find a Jewish value to back it up. Okay, we're all very good at that and doing, finding psukim to back it up. But what we need to do is to match those desires and hopes with where we are, what our capacity is, and where are the areas in which we can work, whether it's reproductive justice, whether it's immigration, whether it's an attack on the environment right now, and of course civil rights and where we as Jews fit in. I have more to say, but we'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thanks, and I think really, Josh, a lot of things that you've said, obviously we see similar phenomenon happening here in Israel, right? The complete overall threat on democracy from different fronts, the fact that we should really see what is our priority, because we can't fight everything at once, because there are so many things happening by the government. The fact that both governments came very ready with a very ready plan on how to crush democracy from within, and what are we supposed to do as a liberal camp. But I want to turn back to Oded and to ask, in this situation where we are actually fighting against people who do not respect our rules or the basic rules of the system, right? Don't respect the fundamental principles of democracy. As Josh said, their attack on democracy is really so fast and so happening on many fronts at the same time. And also, they're using negative messages, which are hard, but unfortunately are very effective, okay? And they have, of course, the upper hand because they control a lot of media channels. And the question is, how can we fight back, right? In a way that suits our beliefs, but is effective and could really pose a real answer to what we're seeing on both countries.
Yeah, thanks. So that was very interesting, Josh, and also perhaps I could relate, because these are things that are relevant for Jews in the US, Israelis here, and other places where democracy is threatened. So first of all, just 2 points before I answer. First of all, our political rivals, our political opponents in Israel, it's the government, in the US, also the government, are using politics of fear and hatred, etc., but they're also using the politics of hope, because they have some vision, which is very different from ours, and they celebrate this vision. So for example, in Israel, there are people here that wish to, that their dream is Jewish superiority, is the expelling of the Arabs from this place, is building the third temple, etc., and they celebrate this, right? So this celebration of values, not only believing in values, but celebrating values and kind of putting them front and center is a hope strategy, okay? So they're also using this. The second thing is that I want to talk a little bit about what hope as a strategy looks like, but I will say that we sometimes confuse it with being gentle or being fuzzy, or being like lovey-dovey. No. Politics of hope you need is very assertive, and you need even some kind of zeal in order for you to push the politics of hope and to push our values forward. Right? And I'll give an example, and I'll return to the awful attack on the synagogue in Ra'anana 3 or 4 weeks ago. 2 days after the attack, I went to the synagogue on Friday evening just to support the community. A day afterward, there was a huge demonstration in Ra'anana, huge demonstration, 25,000 people from all over Israel came and demonstrated against the attack, and the speakers were great, etc. But if we think about what people talked about, the speakers, for example, talked about in front of this huge 25,000 people crowd, they talk about the attackers, and they talk about, and rightly so, right? They talk about how dreadful they are and how brutal and how inhumane and un-Jewish these attacks are. This is completely true. But 99% of the time was devoted to them. Okay? And their crimes and their distorted values, etc. And of course it is true. But if we give 99% of our attention to our political opponents, then in many ways they won. Okay? But if we want, now let's think about an alternative demonstration using the politics and the strategies of hope. This demonstration will start by, celebrating the community in Ra'anana, celebrating their achievements, celebrating their courage, celebrating the achievements of the progressive movement, the Jewish movement in Israel, the Reform movement, celebrating this unbelievable power of combining tradition and Jewish thought and community with liberal values. That's like a win-win. You can't go better than combining, tradition and values and Jewish heritage with, equality or peace and democracy, right? For me, it's very inspiring. And if you talk about that to the people, and most of them were not from the community, then you start to use the politics of it. And then let's imagine that they will say, okay, now we're opening a campaign, fundraising campaign. And the campaign is not only to fix the windows of the synagogue, is to build a second floor. So we are going to double the space and double the community's programs in Ra'anana, making sure that every kid in Ra'anana knows what, okay. And now we're doing that. And this is the politics of hope. And let's imagine, for example, that on the screens, they will put like a QR code, and demonstrators could do that and donate, 100 shekels. And suddenly you have, in 30 minutes, you have $250,000 shekels, or even more, it depends, right? So a lot of money is done, and this is like demonstrate power, demonstrate courage, and demonstrate hope, right? It demonstrates hope because we're talking about us, and we're talking about our values and our dreams, and we are doing that. So this is in many ways, it's a little bit different just from what you said than trying to find, because you are right, they want to smack us in the head all the time, and this is kind of shock and awe. We are going to get these hits and blows all the time. And if we're only going to preoccupy ourselves with trying to defend against their blows, we will never win. We win if we celebrate our values and invite others to join us. So it's kind of a partial answer.
I really identify with that because I think doing what we are doing here, the Israel Religious Action Center, we are, and the movement as a whole, I think since October 7th we were very busy presenting to the Israeli public a vision which is an alternative vision to the vision of the government, specifically around the issue of shared society between Jews and Arabs, because we said it's not enough to fight racism and to say that everything the government is doing is wrong, but actually to say this is what is right? And we should imagine a different future, a different vision, and try to make it happen, which is exactly the two aspects of hope that you mentioned in the beginning. So I definitely relate to what you said, and actually, after I read what Oded has written about not talking about the rival, but actually talking about ourselves, I can't get it out of my head, right? And a couple of weeks ago, I attended the Peace Summit in Jerusalem, attended by thousands of people, and I wrote to Oded that only after an hour and a half, Netanyahu was mentioned for the first time. So it was amazing. It was as if people have actually read and heard what Oded is saying and said, okay, we're going to celebrate our values. We're not going to say what he's doing wrong, but we're talking about what we are doing right, and to try to get as many people to agree with us and to engage with what we're doing and to mobilize us. So I think this is something that the liberal camp definitely has to learn. I don't know, Josh, what you think about the American people. Is it something that you feel it's the same with sort of American audience, thinking about celebrating what we are instead of talking about Trump all the time? And I know it's hard because, right, what can we do? No, this is our governments. They set the agenda and we have to respond to this. But we have to respond and we also have to initiate, right? Other things, not only in response to what is doing.
Yeah, there's definitely a fine balance between the being proactive and being reactive. Okay? Sometimes we need to be reactive. So, for example, just on a personal note, my family and I work very closely with a number of refugee families in our neighborhood. We started with different kinds of asylum seekers from different places, most notably from Venezuela. Okay? They were living in a makeshift shelter, and then the mayor of New York, with sort of the encouragement of the new administration, said they have to all be dispersed. Why? Essentially, so they won't be too comfortable there where and they won't want to stay. We've seen this movie here also. And on November 10th, the mother of the girl who's in my youngest daughter's class called us in tears and was saying, ICE, I-C-E, the immigration police, essentially, are they going to come and take us away? Are they going to come and take my daughter? We tried to calm her down, but we also said, maybe that could actually happen. That is real, right? And people are being taken off the streets. So taking a personal story and lifting it up on the national level, our movement joined a number of other organizations in which we essentially filed a lawsuit saying that ICE cannot come into religious institutions or schools. Okay? What's the significance of that? They had no boundaries, okay, and no limitations. And we need to be able to say that, okay, citizens of the United States and people who are under protected status should be able to feel safe in our synagogues, churches, mosques, etc., and in schools. Okay? And it was one threat. It was very reactive, of course, to the moment, but also said, okay, if we can do this, what else can we do? And sort of
a sense of agency.
A sense of agency and the building blocks of hope, I would say. Okay? Now, there's a whole grassroots movement that needs to happen here. Okay? And we have it in Israel. Halavai, that we could bring out the percentages that came out into the streets in Israel. That is not happening. And people ask me all the time, especially from Israel, saying, what's it going to take for you guys to take to the streets in major cities? And I think there is a great deal of a combination of feeling defeated, okay, of defeatism, and a sense of, I'm only one person, what can I do? Okay, and we don't feel the strength in the masses that when you're standing on Kaplan Street, surrounded by 150,000 people, or in other cities as well, that's not there. Okay, and I don't know if that's a problem, and I don't know if that's something that's surmountable, even to light a fire under people and say, hey, this is the moment, and you have to go out. People are afraid. People are afraid to be to have their name on lists. People are afraid to come out in public and protest. There's attacks not only in the academia, there's attacks against nonprofit statuses. Again, we've seen this movie here as well. And there is massive, what's called the Department of Governmental Efficiency, or DOGE, which it's called being riffed, right? And causing mass layoffs among the bureaucracy, the millions of people who work for the government. And it's a very tense time, right? So how do we both be reactive and say, okay, let's mobilize against one thing, okay, and let's also try to be proactive for what we see coming down the line. And how do we look, as you know, the way the system is that every 2 years there's a fairly major election. We're looking at 2026, where there's going to be midterm elections, where there's a chance to get back a majority.
We're going to have elections too in 2026.
I read something about that. Yeah, I heard about that. The first
It's
time
a
in
rumor.
how many years?
Not sure this.
Right. I'm sure that, you know, even though it is a chok yesod, can their basic law, can it be surmounted? So I'm really trying to find those balances between reactivity and proactivity.
I agree that we need to have this balance, but I think one major challenge that we have is the fact that we are facing a lot of fake news going around, right? In both countries and really all the world now, by populist regimes. And in such circumstances, it's really hard to even agree about the fundamental values. So if we really sort of play on different fields and we cannot agree about the fundamental truth, how can we convince people? How can we tell people, like Josh said, people in order to go to the streets needs to feel that they can actually change something, that other people are willing to listen, maybe we can bring more people to our camp. How can we do it in such a challenging time?
So maybe I'll first answer this idea of fake news and truth, etc. So in fact, it has always been like that, but now it's even more. What is truth? How do we know what is true or not? It's very hard. In this era, what is true is what is said the most times, the most frequent times, the loudest times, that is kind of resonates from many directions, right? And in many ways, for us, it's easy. Why? First of all, we know that we are on the right side, in a sense that our values, really, I'm saying, I believe in democracy because I really believe that it is really good for everyone, not only for me. I really believe that the democratic system is supposed to be, you know, a benefit, like something for the benefit of the whole. And because I know that, I don't, like, this is truth, okay? What we are believing in democracy, in peace, in equality, all these values, this is the truth, okay? Now we just have to speak it loud, frequent, again, celebrate it, put it, you know, front and center as loud as we can from many channels as possible. And if we do it correctly, it will become the truth, because the truth is what is said and repeated the most. So this is for the truth issue. I will say that anger is important for social movements. So we need to be angry at the government, and we need to be concerned with what's happening. We don't want to be naive. We don't want to look at the other side. It's not that it's not important. We just need to put it in the right amount and not let it kind of own us. We need to own it. So in many ways, like a good kind of plan is to start with us and start with celebrating our values, and very important, our heroes. Right? So the people that are, you know, that are the leaders of the liberal movement, and people who are leaders of protests, and others, women and men that are so courageous, like we need to speak about them and kind of hail them.
You had a really good story about Gilad Karif coming to the
person.
Maybe tell them.
Yeah, so I'll give you it's a short story. So most of the times I go to the demonstrations in Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv. This is like when Shabbat is done, and then I go with my wife Yasmin. And many times after the demonstration ends, there are actually rallies, or people walk on the street, you know, with the signs and the banners and, you know, and drums and everything. And we joined one of these, and it was getting late. So I said, okay, Yasmin, I'm going back to the kids. And she stayed with our friends protesting, and just I come home, I get a phone call, she was arrested. Okay, she's an oncologist, a PhD, MD in Ichilov, she was arrested. Okay, it's not the first time, it happens to us, like arrest, and it happens, okay. And there is, what we do is that outside of the police station, while the people who are arrested are kind of interrogated or, you know, held there for several hours, the demonstrators come and they encourage those who are inside, right, they yell like stuff, encourage the people on the rest. The problem is that, again, most of the chanting is not to encourage it's not like, hey, we are heroes, or you guys hang on there. It's like discouraging the government or saying bad things about the government. So again, the police, etc. So again, we are kind of entrapped by our political rivals, that we are always looking at them and their awful things that are doing, instead of seeing how brave, our side is. Then, of course, Harav Knesset Gilad Kariv, right? He was here today and is here today. He's one of the heroes of the protesters. He's always there, always encouraging everyone, and many times he comes at like midnight, even later, and tries to quicken the release of the people who were arrested. But when he came, instead of saying chanting about Gilad, which the protesters love, they chanted against Ben Gvir, the head of the Israeli police. Okay, so there comes their hero, but then when he came closer, one of the protesters started singing, who is coming? Our next prime minister, and everybody joined, because it's electrifying. Suddenly you celebrate your heroes, and you put them high. You hail them. And it's really, really, really. It was very powerful. The police didn't know what was going on, but this is the type of thing that we want to do. This is the type of hope strategies that we need to use.
Two quick things. One is, when you were talking about earlier, Josh, and also you, about what you can do to kind of create the right kind of energy, I wanted to compliment you, Rabbi Greenberg, and you, Rabbi Dingzer, the way in which we approached, or the arts that approached the World Zionist Congress, using positive values where the other slates were attacking the reform movement. So that's my first point. The second one has to do happiness. There are surveys that I follow every year that Israel is one of the most happiest countries, which always surprises the people who hear that, and then we speculate on why, how they measure it. And I wanted to see if you could connect happiness as seen by these studies to hope.
Yeah. So I'm not a big believer in the happiness international index, yeah. Mostly it demonstrates a very, very sophisticated mechanism of suppression of the Israelis, and also it's important, okay, I'll give another example, and that shows why hope is so important. Many times we think, okay, people are not mobilizing because they're not aware of the dangers. So let's tell them how awful it is, how dangerous it is, how frightful it is, and then they will mobilize. Right? The trick is that if it's too much, then people, every organism, when it is facing a crisis, could either challenge reality or adapt to it. And many times people will naturally choose to adapt to a difficult reality, then challenge it or fight it. And so we need to be careful with sometimes we overstress the difficulties. Listen, the situation is terrible. We're not sugarcoating it at all. What we're doing is just putting it in the right level so it would not overwhelm us. So for me, it's important, yes, we need to talk about the challenges, we need to talk about the problems, etc. But we can't, sometimes we start by talking about them, we continue by talking about the problems, and then we end by talking, and it kind of overwhelms us and takes us down, okay? So I think, first of all, for this happiness index, I'm not very sure. It also, speaking of, because it's so hard, it's very important for people that live in hard times to say, no, we're happy, we're good, right? It's a mechanism of coping. It's a coping mechanism. And so I will not give too much stress about that, but we'll try to encourage us to use strategies of hope in what we're doing.
I want to add about the happiness index. I think one of the things that is unique for Israel is the sense of community and solidarity. I think, of course, the Israeli Reform Movement has a major role in this, right? In the fact that we offer people to be part of a community, to be part of something that is bigger than them. And this is something that gives people both hope and happiness. And I think we play a major role in this. And I think also it's a really important answer to the challenge of the liberal story as a whole in the world, right? In all of the world, we are seeing the liberal values threatened. And we see that the liberal story is not compelling enough to persuade people. And I think what a lot of people are missing is a sense of belonging, of feeling to be part of something. And I think here in Israel, a lot of people who follow the current government have a very strong sense of, belonging, and we have to give it to them. And I think in this sense, and I think we spoke, Oded and me, about this, the Reform Movement and other organizations have a really good answer in this, and that's why our role is so vital. I'm going to give you that in a second, but maybe Josh, you want to add something on this?
Yeah, I have a lot to say on this, and I'll try to keep it brief. So let's connect two types of change and the sense of belonging and what does it mean for an individual, okay? Lindsay and Blake, who are trained community organizers, and I'm not. I'm like a Jewish educator, okay, and rabbi. It's fairly useless. And what I'm learning is that first of all, for the short-term, immediate change, anger is a critical motivating factor. Okay, and what we did well, yes, we were positive in this World Zionist Congress elections, but what at the end of the day got it for a lot of people, especially those who are grandparents, they say, your grandkids aren't going to be recognized in the state of Israel.
As Jews.
Oh, as Jews. Yeah, thank you. Yes. They're not going to be recognized as Jews in the state of Israel, so what are you going to do about it? Now, when we ask broadly in America, what are you going to do about it? Well, there's not a lot they can do tachlis, okay? Are they going to make Aliyah and vote in the Knesset? Unlikely, okay? Are they going to buy their own newspaper and call it Yisrael Machar? Okay? Unlikely, okay? Are they going to find their own political pack and start a new political party, etc., and compete with Forum Kohelet? Yeah, also, no. So they can do this one thing. And that's the short term, okay? The long term requires something different. And I think that when we rack our brains to try and tell a compelling story, we're missing a critical element, and that is listening, okay? If for as much as we tell a good story, I think that what we, especially, let's say the Reform Movement, and let's say the liberal elites, okay, who are not worrying about their next meal, okay, who have a place to live, and who are fairly comfortable, okay, to compare to multitude out there who are not, okay? And I just want to recommend a book. It's called Second Class, How the Elites Betrayed the Working Class, by a journalist called Batya Unger Sargon, who now writes for the Free Press that Barry Weiss created. She spent years during the first Trump administration going around the United States and interviewing people who voted for Trump and trying to understand what was behind this, okay? And I feel like, there's been, the Trump phenomenon is a bubbling up of years of pent-up frustration.
Same here.
I think it's the exact same thing here. Although when my friends who were in favor of the Jewish reform, and I do have those, were saying to me, we're just tired of the liberal Ashkenazi, Labor Party, rule of the entire country. I said, how long has the Likud been in power? Since 1947 years? Okay, what do you mean tired of it? Anyway, but that's a discussion. It's a perception. And Oded, building on what you said about truth. I want hope to be the third question that we ask. The first has to be, who are you? What is your narrative? Okay, how did you get to where you are today, ideologically, politically, spiritually? All those questions. Let's understand who we are. Okay, because one of the number one, when I go to speak in congregations across North America, the number one problem that people who let's say roughly our age in this room say is that they can't talk to their kids. Can't talk to their kids about politics, cannot talk to their kids about Israel and Zionism, for sure, okay? And I said, instead of talking to your kids, did you try listening to your kids first? And understanding their, the spheres of influence that led to where, their current ideological state, let's say, okay? and it's very painful sometimes. I mean, we had this experience. We had a group of our alumni from one of our camps come together with, really painful accusations in terms of the place of Israel in the Reform movement, of that Zionism was too prominent and too prevalent in the Halavai, right? Okay, and I said we're gonna have a Zoom call, and I'm going to keep the mute button on myself for an hour. Okay, and I always want to get in, just to listen. The second question after we say, what is your narrative? Who are you? The second question is, what are your fears? What do you actually fear that is going to happen? Okay, what are you worried about? Are you worried that we're going to be stripped of our rights? That we're going to expel, all of Gazans out of Gaza? Are we, the long list. But just understand, wait a second, you and I actually have the same fears. And then I think, and I'm interested in Oded's, perspective on this. I think there's a reason that only then say, okay, now tell me your hopes, your aspirations, and your dreams. Okay. And I think the question I have to ask is, what is that kav between how we take it where we are, who we are, avoid our fears from manifesting, and then what do we have to do to implement and achieve our hopes and our dreams?
I want to ask, as a final round, both Oded and Josh, both to maybe relate to what we just heard, but also I want to end on a hopeful note, right? We're a session on hope. And I want to tell you that what gives me hope is, first of all, what you said, which is the belief that we're doing the right thing and we're doing something meaningful at a very challenging time. So this in and of itself is important. I think that for us Israelis, the fact that we know that what we do matters to so many people outside of Israel, to really liberal Jews all around the world, is something that gives me hope and strengthens me. I think one of you mentioned it before, we need to celebrate victories, even if they're small, because they can boost us and give us energy to continue. I think, like Leah said, we have to remember that history is not linear. It's really changing and dynamic. And what seems today as something that is going to last forever is not, right? Things are changing and we have to keep on going until we overcome this difficult time. So we have to sort of put things into perspective. And we have to remember, I think, Josh, you referred to it, that we are surrounded by so many people, both in Israel and in the States, that share our values. And really going out on protests, right? Going out every week to protest is really, really exhausting, right? We don't have a Shabbat anymore because every Shabbat afternoon for 2.5 years we're going out to the streets. But it fills us with hope because we see how many people care, how many people go out and physically stand up for our values, really praying with our feet, right? Like Rabbi Joshua Heschel said, because we care and people are not willing to give up. So this, for me, gives me hope. So maybe Oded, tell us what gives you hope, and then Josh.
So, I really liked what you said, and kind of this connects back to the issue of community. Okay. So we know, speaking of the happiness index, but we know regardless of that specific index, that the single most robust predictors of people's happiness across cultures, across time, is a strong sense of community, right? It could be family, it could be members, it could be friends, it doesn't matter. We are social beings, and the fact that we have a strong community is essential to our well-being. And so one of the things we talk about demonstrations, right? So we could think about two goals of the demonstration. One is to topple the government. That's good. Let's do that. Okay. But the second thing is also to organize our community and to see like-minded people around us and to feel this support and solidarity with people and to socialize. Okay, at first I thought it's not okay to go to demonstrations to socialize. We're dealing with tough things, it's politics, okay? But then I understood, no, it's great to socialize and come to socialize and meet your friends and bring your kids along and get this setting of community. And that really boosts hope for two reasons. One, that in terms of the expectation, we could maybe now feel that we're going to get what we want. And the second, it also in many ways shows us why we're here. Like it brings the future that we're looking for, solidarity, like a community that has solidarity and values, suddenly you see it, and you go there, you see what you are fighting for. Like all the country would look like this when we succeed. So you have a concrete visualization of the dream. So it's also something that gives me hope.
Yeah, I think we really saw it in general with the civil society in Israel, right, as an alternative universe to the government, right, especially after October 7th. We saw something that is not working and something that is so beautiful and powerful and shows us how this country could look like. So Josh, final word.
Leah, I love the question of desire, and if I think about the greatest quote that I've ever heard from the greatest leader that I've ever learned about desire, it is none other than Theodor Herzl. Okay, what's the line? Im tirtzu ein zo agada. Now, how do we translate that? Because Herzl, he said it in German. Right? And he used the term in German willst. In dus willst, right? What?
Willing.
How do you say it?
You're willing.
Huh?
It's just kind of.
Right, it's not a dream. And we translate that as leratzot, if you want it to happen. Okay? I think it means something slightly else, and I would use the word in Hebrew, imtu muchanim. Okay, if you'd be willing to do something. So and there's a slight difference, because I can want something as much as I want, but if I'm willing to do it, that's something else. Okay? And I'll just say, I sit on the executive council of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. Okay, this is a real thing that exists. Okay? And I've never met a minor organization. Okay, before in my life. But I'm sitting there on a Zoom, it's all in Zoom, right? And I'm talking and arguing with the head, Rabbi Moshe Hauer, who is the head of the Orthodox Union, the OU. Okay? And the topic was, when are we, even us in the Reform movement and the conservative movement, when are we going to publicly thank the President of the United States for all that he's doing to support Israel and to fight anti-Semitism? Okay. I said, let me ask you a question. I said, I'm going to change the topic. Do you think transgender people are created in the image of God? Now, he's an Orthodox guy. He can't say no. Okay? He can't say no. Well, and I see him uncomfortable. Well, it's against the Torah, and it's this. And I said, let me ask you a question. Are transgender people, okay, like, are they or not? Okay? He goes, well, yes, of course. I said, then why aren't you on the streets protesting in their defense? Because they were being attacked and they were being threatened. Well, it's in the Torah, my community and my... I said, okay. You need to have that will. You need to have that fight. And you need to be convinced, okay? And you need to see that you're not alone doing those things. And I think it's a combination of all those different factors that will lead to change. So I hope we can continue to do that together, all of us.
Thank you.